Welcome to LongevityPost.com. Today we're talking about probably the most underdiagnosed health condition on the planet, namely thyroid issues. So Brian, why are thyroid problems so common in the world today?
Well, Bob, it's because the treatments are wrong and the diagnosis is frequently missed.
Why is that?
Well, it's because of blood tests. Blood tests are not accurate. And we have a pituitary that is in part related to a test called Thyroid Stimulating Hormone, or TSH. The problem is that is 100 times more sensitive than the actual real direct thyroid hormone activity tests. So they're using the wrong test to diagnose a problem, and therefore they're not getting an accurate result, Bob.
Could you recommend any other test that will actually help diagnose?
Well, yes, I can. So, short answer, number one, do you have symptoms? Number two, you can use what's called a basal temperature test, or a resting test. Basal means resting. So if you're looking for a deviation from, in Fahrenheit, it would be 97.8 degrees or less. If it's less than 97.8, you probably have a thyroid problem. If in Celsius, a number less than 36.5, if you're running below that, you probably have a thyroid issue.
And let's say that I have a thyroid issue. What would my symptoms be?
Okay, so there's quite a number of symptoms. In fact, most recently, even arthritis is a symptom of that. So there's chronic infections. Think of any type of infection, or back a long time ago when people had epidemic levels of thyroid issues, which we still do, they were prescribed antibiotics. But the real thing is, if you have an underdiagnosed thyroid, or you have a thyroid issue, you're going to get sick because you're going to have an infection. Heart disease, myocardial infarction, heart attack, that's an infection. You're simply suffering from a sluggish thyroid. That's why people get heart attacks. So others, more common symptoms in everyday people: cold hands, feet, poor circulation, constipation, depression, type 2 diabetes, yep, that's driven by the thyroid. Dry skin, elevated, like all kinds of different measurements. I won't get into that. Fibromyalgia, if you're constantly getting sick, maybe chronic colds, lots of flu, that's a thyroid issue. Brittle nails, hair loss, migraines, headaches, elevated cholesterol, hyperactivity in children, thyroid issue right there. Hot flash, night sweats, and menopause, thyroid issue. Indigestion, thyroid issue. Lack of attention, thyroid issue. Learning disabilities, thyroid issue. Memory loss, Alzheimer's, yep, thyroid issue. Pre-menstrual syndrome, PMS, thyroid issue. Sinusitis, thyroid issue. And of course, weight loss or weight gain. So consider that. You can't lose weight, thyroid. So there you go, Bob.
All right, Brian. I heard you mention depression.
Okay, so I mentioned that, Bob, because a lot of people have it. Why? Isn't that crazy? Well, depression is a type of inflammation, right? And I mentioned earlier, you have inflammation, you probably have a thyroid issue, maybe. I'm not saying you will or do, but you probably do. So why would depression have anything to do with, say, having a low T3 level or whatever? Well, it is. So now, low cortisol can make depression worse. There's another little avenue. But so the real problem, though, and I really wanted to bring this attention to our listening audience, is that if you're taking an antidepressant, it could actually make your hypothyroidism symptoms worse. So taking an antidepressant isn't really solving an issue. It's making an issue worse. It's making the underlying condition even worse than before.
So what can be done to correct this problem?
Okay, that's a very good question, Bob. So I universally recommend what is called a natural desiccated thyroid supplement. So this is usually the best way to go. And if you would ask why, I would say, well, unlike synthetic T4 only medications, which have been problematic for so many patients, this includes Synthroid, levothyroxine. Desiccated thyroid is natural and gives you exactly what your own thyroid would be giving you. Let's say T1, T2, T3, T4, and calcitonin, for example.
So consuming a natural desiccated thyroid product is completely safe.
It is. In fact, Bob, it was the first thing they were recommending. And then all of a sudden the pharmaceutical cartel came around and started saying, hey, we need to get you on some synthetic stuff. The doctors said, why? Why would we do that when this natural desiccated thyroid has been working wonderfully? Why would we switch? So they thought of how do we twist, how do we spin, how do we create propaganda to get our cells nice? Well, they started coming up with inaccurate reasons like, well, it's easier to measure and, less of a hassle. They loved that. They bought that. Eventually, people just started thinking it was superior. Well, it's not. It's inferior. So that's the short answer.
So what kind of desiccated thyroid products do you recommend?
The ones I recommend, and I got to give a bit of a backstory to this. A lot of people, when they think of desiccated thyroid, they're usually thinking of things like Armour thyroid. You've probably heard of Armour, I'm sure. In 2010, they changed the formula. Now, it was already working to begin with, but when they changed it, I don't know what nefarious reason or the motivation for why they changed it, but I can tell you that people did not like how it works now. So my recommendations for thyroid brands, or rather desiccated preparations, are going to be different than that. So let's begin with something called ERFA, also known as simply thyroid. We'll list this on the written part of the text. There's also Cella's NP thyroid, have a website address for that. Then there's Nature Throid, and there's also something called Westhroid. And so these are all much more effective, very effective types of desiccated thyroid hormone.
So what is your opinion on detoxification or cleansing of the thyroid?
It's a great question, Bob. And here's really the answer. Very advanced question I might ask too, because a lot of people think, well, do I need thyroid medication to fix my thyroid? What if I'm, my thyroid's running a little slow? Do you really need thyroid medication? Well, maybe you don't. In fact, something as simple as detoxification could actually be all your body really needs. So let's get into that. So yes, absolutely, a detoxification performed correctly can really help your thyroid a lot. So let me get into that just a little bit. What causes your thyroid to get dirty or full of toxins in the first place? Well, there's malnutrition and there's also toxins. What type of toxins? Well, you have phthalates, you've got various types of endocrine disruptors, and these simply create damage. So you want to detox. How do you do that? Well, there's something called an infrared sauna that'll help detox the phthalates and the bisphenol A and all the endocrine disruptors. And there's also heavy metals, huge there. So you want to detoxify, you got to do heavy metal detoxification. That's sort of a subject that there's not enough time to really explain that, but suffice to say, properly done, detoxification is highly recommended when someone knows what they're doing.
And of course, detoxing the thyroid will also pull out fluoride?
Well, actually, yes. That's a great question, Bob. So let's get into that just a little bit. Very important avenue here. You've got all of these toxins. You have the halides. Halides are things like chlorine, fluorine, otherwise known as fluoride. And you have other types of things that the thyroid really can't really distinguish or differentiate between. Let's say your thyroid's loaded in fluoride, right? You can have a blood test, everything will turn out normal because your thyroid thinks it has all the iodine it needs. On the periodic table, when you look at chlorine or fluorine or other things, they're very similar to iodine in terms of their structure. The problem is what's called competitive inhibition, which means that when you're looking at the thyroid, a little bit of fluoride or fluorine molecules will attach to the thyroid very easily. But it takes a lot more iodine to actually get there. So that's called competitive inhibition. In some chemicals, like percolate, which is rocket fuel, has 30-to-1 inhibition, meaning that you need 30 times the iodine to even compete, for the iodine to actually attach to the thyroid. Now, you can't produce thyroid hormone without iodine. So things that actually prevent iodine from getting in there to produce thyroid hormone to begin with are things like fluorine, chlorine, percolate, and endocrine disruptors. So kicking out the fluoride is a very, very good idea, and one way to do that is the iodine. Now, the bigger heavy metals that we sort of mentioned a little bit, they have have their own issues as well.
But a lot of people, Brian, they are almost paranoid of iodine. Why is this? And
well, yeah, that's a great question, Bob. Always a very common question. People wonder, because, they hear one side from the so-called establishment, and then you have these people that may have felt amazing, but then you got that small percentage of people who just, hey, this didn't affect me very well. So yeah, it is true that some people are either allergic to iodine. Oh, that's a bit of a more complex, a little bit more complex than that. There's no one's really allergic to iodine, but they certainly have a detoxification situation. So they might have to go through a special type of way to remediate that. But what I'm really saying, though, Bob, is that there is probably about 1 out of every 100 people are going to have a high sensitivity to iodine. In other words, they're going to feel horrible. So anytime you begin on iodine, you want to start very, very slowly to see how your body reacts to it. That's the key point. However, iodine is absolutely crucial for producing thyroid hormone. So are they paranoid? Well, the medical establishment has erroneous data that do not thoroughly explain what's really going on in the body. In fact, what they're saying is just flat out wrong. What you really understand, what you really need to know, is that knowing how iodine affects you is the first important thing to do, and then later you can get into what to do if it's not sitting with you well. What do you do then? Well, you can actually take a food-based iodine supplement, which people tend to tolerate very, very well. That's the solution if you do have an iodine sensitivity issue.
can you explain a little bit about the connection between the thyroid and the adrenal glands?
Yes, I can. So what's interesting about the thyroid is the thyroid has a big effect and influence from the adrenal glands, the health of the adrenal glands themselves. So many patients will find themselves with adrenal dysfunction, and this is entirely due to perhaps the synthetic T4 treatment. So for example, maybe they're being given levothyroxine or they're giving Synthroid, same thing. And they're taking this single thyroid hormone, not T1, not T2, not T3, just T4. They may actually find themselves with adrenal dysfunction. Now, why would that happen? Well, there could be a cortisol issue. Cortisol is an adaptive stress hormone. You need a little bit of cortisol because it allows your immune system to say, hey, I know what's bad and what's good. Let's differentiate between friend or foe. And if you have too much cortisol, that can cause a lot of crazy things to happen too. So it's important to understand the state of your adrenal glands before you entirely dive 100% into treating your thyroid condition.
So what are the most common symptoms for adrenal dysfunction?
If you have a problem with your adrenal glands, right? So here's some symptoms of poor adrenal. Extreme fatigue, that would definitely be one of them. Your scalp aches, that's another one. Maybe a jittery feeling. Maybe dropping things, bumping into things, feeling clumsy. Confusion, that's another one. Suddenly feel extremely hungry. Having low back pain. Dull, clouded feelings. This happens usually when a patient is due for a next cortisol dose. So if they're extremely low cortisol, they're going to have some problems there. Jumpiness, muscle weakness, lightheadedness, motion sickness. If you're drinking coffee, you're very sensitive to coffee and it just puts you to sleep, the classical sign there. Vomiting, even running up to the slightest incline. Also, almost passing out every time you get up. That's called orthostatic hypotension. Dark circles under your eyes. Get one asked all the time about these raccoon eyes. Well, adrenal dysfunction, that's a classical indication of adrenal dysfunction, is those raccoon eyes or those dark circles under your eyes. Also, waking up in the middle of the night for several hours. Maybe difficulty falling asleep at night. Also, frequent urination. IBS symptoms, irritable bowel syndrome symptoms, and then finally worsening allergies. Your allergies are just getting more frequent.
And how do we fix the adrenal glands, Brian?
Well, typically here, the culprit is too little cortisol. Not enough cortisol. That's usually the culprit. So how do you go about, want to make sure you have it, right? So to test for it, it's necessary to do a 24-hour adrenal saliva test. Not a blood test, but a saliva test, a 24-hour adrenal saliva test. Once you get the results there, the doctor would probably recommend you being put on some sort of natural or synthetic-based cortisol, very, very low dose, a physiologic dose, not a pharmacological overdose. That's the kind of stuff you hear when people have a suppressed immune system. You want to give them a physiologic dose, enough to actually allow your body to produce its necessary function. So usually it's hydrocortisone is what they give you, low-dose hydrocortisone.
And this is safe and effective, even long-term.
It's safe and effective when dosed correctly and appropriately. So that's why you want to test for it. Make sure you need it.
If you're eager to get healthier but are fed up with non-holistic pharmaceutical-based one-size-fits-all approach, simply subscribe to our channel and let's prioritize longevity together. Free of charge, full of longevity.
Also, you can help us out a lot by pressing the like button for this video. Thanks and have a great now.